right? Okay. So, it's been a while since I was standing up here before. You may have forgotten what I was doing last time, but the idea I had was when I was going to be filling in while Stuart was away, I was going to try to go over some spiritual practices. And last time, I did something on meditation with co-starring Bonhoeffer, everyone's favorite German Lutheran, other than Luther and all the other German Lutherans. And so I've still been hearing some good feedback about that lately. And before I moved on to what I've got for tonight, I did want to check in again if anyone has been trying to continue to use any of the stuff that we went over during that lesson, or if anyone had anything they wanted to share regarding that before I move on to my tonight's topic.
All I can say is, since you mentioned Bonhoeffer, I like how the Holy Spirit weaves things together. 3 different articles, I follow a lot of different people, have come up and mentioned. One was dealing with his way in which he suggested people process prayer through meditation.
Oh, really?
Another one was just dealing with some of the ways, some of his theological approaches in the midst of incredible difficulty in that time. So after you had mentioned that, there just seemed to be a convergence for a little bit. So
very cool. Okay, I'm pleased to hear that. So tonight I am going to go with loving our enemies as a topic, which might not immediately seem like a practice, and I feel like when I was younger it didn't feel like a practice at all, and I didn't I thought it was a lovely idea. I remember whenever I read through that passage, I was like, yes, Jesus being Jesus, this is a lovely, beautiful thing, but who has enemies? I'm like a nice guy, and everyone else that I know is pretty nice, and it's a nice thing, but it didn't seem very relevant to me. And then I lived a little bit longer, and it was like, oh, okay, that's what he was talking about. So, more recently, I feel like I don't know, those scriptures have felt relevant to me at times and helpful, so I thought it would be a good thing to go over tonight. And I'm going to start by reading one of the passages where Jesus is talking about this in Luke 6, verses 27 through 36. There we go. But I say unto you which hear, love your enemies, do good to them which hate you, bless them that curse you, and pray for them which despitefully use you. And unto him that smiteth thee on the one cheek, offer also the other. And him that taketh away thy cloak, forbid not to take thy coat also. Give to every man that asketh of thee, and of him that taketh away thy goods, ask them not again. And as you would that men should do to you, do ye also to them likewise. For if ye love them which love you, what thank have ye? For sinners also love those that love them. And if you do good to them which do good to you, what thank have ye? For sinners also do even the same. And if ye lend to them of whom ye hope to receive, what thank have ye? For sinners also lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love ye your enemies, and do good, and lend, hoping for nothing again. And your reward shall be great, and you shall be called the children of the highest. For he is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil. Be ye therefore merciful, as your Father also is merciful. So I thought I would start out kind of discussion with some questions. Why do we think Jesus teaches this? Does anyone have any? It is not the default setting of human feeling, I think, to love people that are not nice to us, or to be nice to people that are not nice to us. And yet that is very repeatedly what he is telling us to do. Do we have any ideas for why that might be? If not, I have.
Oh, I have ideas.
Okay. Chuck, do you want to share some of your ideas?
There was definitely a strain of trying to bump the people that he could influence and that were in his orbit into a different approach. So he was intentionally kind of speaking into an understanding of how things were handled. You know, we have the most famous eye for an eye kind of example, but he was trying to not just model, but challenge anyone who would listen, that his way was going to be a different approach. For, you know, love looks different when you're a Christian, when you're a follower of Jesus the Christ. And so that's love your enemies was probably the most extreme example of that, and he was committed to it, and then he would demonstrate it, not just through words, but actions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something I was thinking about, is this teaching really shows us something about God. And by showing us something about God, it shows us something about humans, because it says, you know, at the end, he is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil. You know, it ends up with a meditation on the nature of God. And I think that's part of what this teaching is about. Yes, it is practical, and we'll get into some of that later, but it shows us kind of how humans have sort of strayed from God's will or God's vision of what life should be like. And it also kind of reintroduces us to what he would have us do and be. So it's a lovely, a difficult, but important thing. And what makes this difficult to practice? This is a kind of an obvious one, but why is it hard to love our enemies?
We as humans have that, because we are of sinful nature, we have that retaliation that, okay, I don't want to love them. I don't want to do good to them. And he knew that we would have that, so that's why he instructed us.
Yeah,
Because they're our enemies.
Thank you, yes.
I mean, it seems clear.
Mm-hmm.
So they're our enemies.
They're not our
It's
friends.
easy- You know, it's easy to love, as it says, it's easy to love those who are our friends, who are our loved ones, but someone that hates us or, you know, the enemy. I don't wanna read this, I don't wanna study this, I don't wanna deal with this, and that's why we should,
Yeah,
because it's hard.
I know, yes, and, yeah, I agree.
If we look at what Jesus wants us to do, and that is to share the message. Because God is love, then those people that we may not like, enemies can be a broad definition. Those people we don't like, or they think they don't like us. But we gotta reach out to the world. And those people exist. That's the real world today. Everybody's not your buddy and friend and love you to death. So how do we reach them and share that love of God to them as he's shown to everyone?
Yeah. And I think a lot of the time, what makes it difficult to kind of reach out like that is our default setting is not to love our enemies. It's kind of, if someone makes us afraid, kind of like you were saying, Wilma, we want to make them afraid. Or if someone hurts us, we want to hurt them back. That's kind of the default setting. But, you know, that causes tension to rise rather than fall. And the time in my life when this teaching became particularly relevant to me, I'm not going to go into specifics, but it was, you know, I knew my default reaction was not to show love or to feel love or to be like, oh, this is fine, this is going to work out great. It was, you know, it was a weird feeling like someone was my enemy, because that wasn't something I'd experienced before, and I was like, oh, this is uncomfortable, and how do I, you know, protect myself, or how do I protect the people that I care about, and, you know, I don't really care what happens to this person, or, you know, I just want to make sure that my people are safe, right? And that seemed originally like the right thing, but as I was thinking about it, and this passage kind of came to mind, okay, well, this is in theory what I'm supposed to do, right? So I could test this out, see if this helps. And the way I started was by praying nightly for this person that I was, having issues with. And I mean, it was not easy or fun, and but I did notice as I kind of kept on doing it, it's strange how, I don't know, praying for someone or thinking about them can kind of make you remember that they're human too. And it can, I don't know, for me, it really changed my attitude, and it didn't happen quickly, and it's not like a steady progress. I have moments where it's like, oh, yep, nope, that's not nice, I don't like that. And then I've got to, process through stuff again. But yeah, so on that topic, when we try to practice loving our enemies or praying for our enemies, who does that help? Yeah, it can help us. Yeah, it can help us. And something, when I was thinking about how does it help us? There's a lot of ways. If it does break the tension, then we have less conflict, which is good. But I feel like anytime someone is making themselves our enemy, or is trying to hurt us, or trying to scare us, or whatever they're trying to do, our two options are kind of, we can imitate them, and we can allow them to make us more like them by responding the way they're acting towards us, or we can imitate God. And it's kind of weird to think about it that way, but it is a defiant act, and it's really the most forceful way you can act against someone is really not even acknowledging their response as the correct one, and going to God's response and trying to imitate him and focus on God rather than the conflict or the enemy or whatever the problem is, which is easy to say, but it isn't.
Do we sometimes perceive that someone's our enemy when in reality they may not be intending that? We get intimidated by that.
Absolutely.
God knows that we would be in this situation, and Jesus did, but I think sometimes our perception is of something that may not be totally reality, but it keeps us from doing the things maybe we should be doing.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's true. Sometimes we perceive people as being our enemies that don't think of themselves that way,
Yeah.
and maybe they just aren't.
Yeah.
And I think conversely, even when people do think of themselves as our enemies, or they think of us as their enemies, we don't have to think about them the same way. Like one of my favorite examples, or a really interesting example of this, is Judas comes to Jesus in the garden and he's betraying him. And when Jesus greets Judas, he calls him friend. Friend, why are you here? And that is a bizarre thing. Of all the things to call Judas, that is a weird thing to call Judas at that moment. And I can't even think, is there another place where he calls one of the disciples? Well, I've called you friends. Yeah, so there's other places. But, that's a very interesting place for him to interject that word. And, that's part of this teaching, I think, is realizing that just because someone might think of themselves as being our enemy, that doesn't mean we have to view them the same way. And maybe some people we view as enemies, if we would just not view them that way, they may not be trying to be that to us. So, but other than us, who else does it help when we love our enemies? This might be the seemingly more obvious answer.
Well, I think I'm not going to pick the obvious answer, maybe, but I think when we love our enemies, we are helping all of society in the fact that we are not playing into the division, but we're doing what God has called us to do, which is to reconcile. And that's the plan. That's God's plans for all of creation, is that we be reconciled. So we're coming into God's will at that moment.
Absolutely. Anyone have anything else?
Well, it pleases God when we're forgiving and.
Yeah. Yeah, it pleases God. And And I've got a final thing that I'm going to if no one gets to it.
I read a thing yesterday and it said, hating your enemy is like drinking poison, hoping it will kill the other person.
Yeah.
It's killing you, isn't it?
Yeah. All right, so the thing I was fishing for, which I didn't get yet, was it also does help your enemy, but it doesn't help them necessarily in the way that we think of it. Which is, I think, we think sometimes when we love our enemies, you know, it weakens us or it makes us vulnerable. But when we show love to people that maybe aren't loving to us, that by kind of breaking that cycle of hatred, it has the potential to free them from that as well. Because I don't know if this is true. I'm trying to think of a specific time when this happened and I can't, but I think generally I've seen it happen where if it is someone that you have tension with, if you are nice to them, it can kind of be disarming and surprising. And the same the other way around. Like when someone that, you know, I am like tense around or whatever is nice to me or is, you know, attentive to me and does something caring, it changes my whole, like, okay, what's happening now? This isn't the way, you know, it sort of, it breaks us out of our own head and the sort of the worlds of like, oh, these are the nice people, these are the not nice people that we make up for ourselves, and it shows us that, you know, everybody's human, everybody has potential to change and, you know, do better. And so it helps both us and our enemies, and by extension, society, and pleases God. Yes, it's just all around a wonderful thing.
It's like that old saying, kill them with kindness.
Yeah.
Although that's a little, not exactly the way we want to look at it, kill them with kindness, but to be nice is
Yeah.
shocking.
What is the passage from Proverbs? Give your enemy bread to eat and water to drink. And
If they are hungry, feed them, give them bread. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. And in doing so, you will heap burning coals on their heads. And
yeah.
the idea of burning coals was to give it a chance to convert their hearts.
Yeah.
Purification.
Remind me of that. Yeah. So, does anyone have any examples either from your life or from the Bible of someone showing love to their enemy and how that worked out? Any examples are valid? I think David and Saul are a good one, right? You know, Saul is chasing David for a very, very long time through the wilderness, up mountains, down mountains, through caves, you know. And yet, there's that time when David finally gets the opportunity to kill Saul, and he gets right up on him, right? And if I'm remembering this right, it's been a while since I read this, you know, puts the sword or the spear or whatever next to him and goes away. And then Saul wakes up the next morning and, oh, you know, and yeah. And it changes Saul's perspective. Even though Saul goes crazy again later, you know, for a moment, Saul is like, okay, I'm definitely in the wrong here. What I'm doing is terrible. Come on back, David, we're cool. Until the next time I go crazy, and then you'll have to run away again. But it still brought resolution to that conflict. And maybe not all of the conflicts of David's life, but at least that one. Does anyone have any else? Any personal experiences?
I go back to the word that Pat used, kindness. When we do that, and sometimes it's hard to do that, we have to be real. That person probably begins to starts thinking, why? Why did that happen?
Yeah.
And that may be all we need to do, because then they start searching. Where am I? Why do I feel this way? Or why do they see me this way? Which can, in turn, change both individuals. But just a simple act of kindness can cause people to think and wonder, why did you do that? Why did they react that way when I'm reacting maybe another way? And maybe that's all I have to do.
Yeah. I agree. So you mentioned kindness and I mentioned prayer. So when we're reading down through this passage, love is kind of the broad term that's used to include a bunch of things, but there's a number of things that are named. It says do good, bless, pray, offer. So like, what are some ways that we can apply loving our enemies? You know, what does that mean practically?
There's good in everybody, even those that are not necessarily in our eyes good, so we need to look for the good in people.
Yep, looking for the good. That's a good way of doing things.
Pray for them.
Praying for them. Yes, that's my, I don't know, that's, at least in my life, that to me is the big one, or like the useful one. I don't know, maybe that's kind of because you know, on one hand, that isn't, I'm not having to go out and be nice to the person that is bothering me. I can, you know, pray for them. But I think it's a good starting point because of that. It isn't, you don't have to go and interact with them. If it's someone that you don't like interacting with, you don't have to be in the same room with them. They don't have to know about it. It's between you and God, you know. And it's a way that you can kind of start trying to change your own mindset. And I was looking through my books to try to find, like I did with Bonhoeffer, a good example of another like Christian person using this in their life. And I did find one in my volume 3 of the complete works of Kanzo Uchimura, who is an obscure, yes, an obscure Japanese Christian writer who is really great and should not be as obscure as he is. But I don't really feel like I need to read it because it's very similar to the anecdote I shared where he was experiencing, you know, serious tension with someone and he started praying for them regularly and it helped him hate them less and gradually, you know, see them as a human being. And I think that prayer, both from that and from my own experience, I think prayer is a really good starting place.
I think praying for the person, but praying for us.
Yeah.
Because we have to take a different approach. So at that same time, we're praying for that individual that we think may not like us or hate us or whatever. We've got to pray for ourselves so that we're able to get over any obstacles we got to make that different.
Absolutely.
But, I think it's two-sided coin.
Could be our own fear or anxiety that causes that problem. It may not be real.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it may be some other thing that where we're even thinking something is happening that's not, or because we dislike a whole group of people.
Yeah.
Active perception.
Yeah, I know a lot of times in the Bible, like imagination shows up not in a super great, not like a Disney light. It's not like imagination, let's go paint a picture or, you know, tell a story. It's usually imagination like, you know, oh, what are those people plotting or what, you know, and even though imagination can be great when we're writing stories or, you know, painting a picture, if we let our imagination kind of go into dark places and go into, you know, work with our fears and kind of create these, you know, bad scenarios in our heads, it is both unhealthy for us and it can cause us to act on stuff that isn't real, but in our heads we think, oh, this is what's happening, and it's not. And that a lot of our conflict comes from that, and a lot of our anxieties come from that. So praying is a way of kind of checking in and thinking, you know, is what I'm thinking actually accurate, or is it something that is existing in my head but not in reality? Do we have any other methods of loving our enemies?
I have a funny story, that goes with what you were talking about. I don't know if anybody in here ever ate at the Woolworths counter years ago.
Yeah.
In my early career working downtown, I would eat at the Woolworths counter on Haywood Street. And so I went in there one day and there was only one spot for me to sit. And there was this little man, he looked like he could have been a comedian or something, cute as he could be. and he had this little black derby hat on. And so I said, may I sit here? And he said, well, sure. So I sit beside him. And he would look over at me and just smile, the sweetest little smile. Well, I ordered shrimp, and I ordered the butterfly shrimp. So and you got 4. And so there was 4 on my plate. Well, he would look at me and smile, and I looked down at my plate. There was only 3 there. And I thought, I took one of my shrimp. And I was just thinking, you know, I'm gonna ask you to pay for a third of my bill or so, a fourth of my bill. And I just always thought about this little man. So he gets up and he leaves and he sort of tilts his hat toward me, and I'm thinking, you stole part of my lunch. Anyway, when she came and took my plate away, I put my hands up like this, and I looked, and there was a shrimp stuck on my sweater. So all those bad things I thought about the little man were not true. I was guilty. So, yeah, so that's my story of me making an enemy of someone that really wasn't.
I think that's a great story, and it's a great
Yes.
example. Yeah. And it's a great example of, you know, when Jesus is saying, you know, if someone smite you on one cheek, turn the other, or, you know, if someone takes this, you know, don't ask for it back. Part of that is maybe when the situation is occurring, but part of that might be, you know, you feel a smack on your cheek, maybe don't turn around and punch the next person, because they may have not actually hit you, you may have just bumped into something, you know? If your shrimp is missing, don't like accuse the cute guy in the bowler hat, you know, look at your sleeve. And, you know, yes, so these teachings, even though they are very poetic and beautiful and lofty and difficult sometimes, they're also very practical and helpful.
Well, helpful, yes. Practical, I would use a different word. Challenging and necessary.
Yeah.
I do think that because it's so challenging for us, I did pay attention to the fact that this passage was shared not with an individual, but shared with a group. And then it gets, as it gets fleshed out in some of the other later writings in the New Testament, there's something to be said because it is so difficult and so different than the way we would naturally respond, that it takes a community to really work it out, so that we can hear stories like Wilma's and we can laugh about it, and then maybe we start to store up some ideas for how we can start to react differently than what our inertia that's just going to just happen initially, left to our own devices. And so a church like this that allows people to be honest and is loving and warm, where we can work through difficult things together in small groups or in larger ways, that's really, I think, the opportunity that a church can provide, that sense of community to work through challenging issues like that.
Absolutely, yeah. Community is very important, and yeah, and sort of, I like something that you said, I can't remember, it was at a Bible study previous, I can't remember if it was whose it was, but it was something like, this passage wasn't talking about, you know, suffering in silence alone.
Right.
It's about something that's happening in a community. And yeah, and that's the thing, this passage isn't talking about, you know, you should just take abuse or you should not remove yourself from a situation where you're getting hurt. It's a way of you making the best of a bad situation for yourself. It's not about letting yourself get hurt or letting someone misuse you. Because there's passages where Paul gets really mad at one of the churches, I can't remember which one, because they were letting people just, you know, really mistreat them, and he was like, no, this you don't need to be letting them mistreat you. You know, you need to ask them to leave, or, you know, get free of that. So it is not, it's something for us. It is not something that is, you know, allowing us to be hurt, and that is a very important footnote to any discussion of this, I think. Yes, sir.
I'll share a story too real quick, but last year I was at a meeting, it was a lunch meeting. And, so I finished my meal and this lady who I knew of but didn't know. When I had my meal finished, she came over to me and said, "May I take your plate?" Wow. And so I said, "No, I'll take your plate for you." So I've gotten to know her later and I've asked her, "Why did you do that?" And I think the simple answer, she said, "That's what we should do." So there's a real message in that, a very simple thing. It just blew me away that somebody would take my plate, that I could have gotten up and taken it over wherever I needed to, but she did, because it's the right thing to do. And maybe as we think about those situations, you just think about, what's the right thing to do?
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's another good point, and that reminded me of something that I forgot to mention. There's something interesting that says, it says, "Bless them that curse you." And what does that mean? What is blessing someone?
Do good.
Do good to them? Yes. But is there a more obvious answer? Lord bless you. God, there are these expressions that we think of as just being kind of like, oh, hey, bless your heart, how are you doing? Hello. But greeting someone, and particularly like taking the time to say, oh, God bless you, or, speaking those words, they have weight to them, sometimes that we don't always understand. And I remember kind of going back to my anecdote earlier when I was, praying for this person that there was tension with in my life. Like one of the first times I interacted with them after I had, been doing this, like when I was saying goodbye, I made a point to say, "Lord bless you," and I never say that to people, but I was just like, I'm gonna try to take it literally and just go with it. And I don't know if that was effective or not. That wasn't like prayer where it was something repeated and I could, sense an effect, but I think that's something that's little that we can do that, I think if we do it with intention can, help them and help us. And that's the thing, it doesn't have to always be dramatic things. It can be little kindnesses, little doing good to other people that can affect.
I think sometimes just what you said to that other person, this is not in a bad way, but it can be a convicting thing. To that individual that makes them think, "God bless you." It's pretty powerful to say that.
Yeah.
And to them, it may start a thought process. Wow,
Yeah.
I'm still working on trying to be kind. So
I know. I think it's a lifelong pursuit.
I still got a long ways to go.
Well, when you say it is your enemy, but yet, or you feel they're your enemy, whichever, but you do have to interact with them, maybe on a routine basis, maybe every day, maybe, once a week or whatever. Like you say, handling that's difficult.
Yeah.
You can pray for them and then pray for yourself to handle it correctly.
Yeah.
So, any ideas on the handling correctly?
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like, every situation is different. I feel like maybe more than a specific method or a specific thing to always do, I feel like, if we think of the idea of loving as being broad, it is kind of like a mindset. It's not like every time we interact with someone, or every time we think about someone, we're going to be successful and like, oh yes, this is a human being that I should care about. Sometimes we're going to be like, that jerk, or that, like, I don't like dealing with this person, get out of my face. That's always going to happen, that's going to recur, but trying to keep ourselves more broadly in the mindset of, I don't want that to be the default setting. I want to try to do better about this. I want to try to be kind. I want to try to bless this person or pray for them. And I feel like the battle isn't so much in the specific methods, but it's coming back to the methods and like messing up and then trying again, and then messing up several more times and still trying again. And, you know, like Wayne was saying, it's like a lifelong process of, you know, doing this. It is not like anyone's going to do it flawlessly.
Right, Jan, I think, did you read the part right at the end where it says, and expect nothing in return? Do all of this and expect nothing in return.
Yet, but love your enemies and do good and lend, hoping for nothing again.
Yeah, there's that whole idea is that when we do these activities, when we can find a way to shed the anger, the hate, the whatever, and not expect anything, we just let it go. And, you know, I'm sure you've heard that expression, you know, let go and let God. It's just kind of, it somehow the quality of our individual hearts and the community's heart grows a little bit, like Dr. Seuss, you know, the heart. It just grows a little bit when we can somehow start to find a way to live this radically different way where somebody takes something and so we, you know, give them even more, because we're not going to let that blacken our hearts and take us down. We are trying to live a different way. And when you can just sort of just expect nothing, you just kind of get in the habit of, oh, that hurts, and I don't want it to stick to me for the rest of my life. I need to let that go.
We should never let our reaction be worse than their action.
Yeah. Agreed. I feel like this discussion has gone very well.
Better than
I'm
you
pleased,
expected.
yes. Does anyone have anything else before I close up?
Another
yeah.
thing, as Christians, we are sometimes looked down on as being hypocritical in so many ways. So as Christians, we need to make sure that we are that example of praying for people and our enemies and not, you know, reacting with hate and violence. I think that will help us, help the Christian congregation and people to be more respected.
Agreed. Yeah, and that's like, even if you think of, you know, Jesus, what he says to his disciples before he leaves, which you preached on, you know, by this shall all men know that you're my disciples, if you have love one to another. And I love that passage because he says it like twice. And then I feel like he might say it again, because he like knows y'all really don't get a lot of the stuff that I've taught. Like, get this point, okay? This is a highlight. Please write this down. Matthew in the back, write this one down. You know, it's important. I love that he repeats it and reiterates it, because that really is the core of, you know, God and, you know, what God does for us in Christ, but then it's also what we're supposed to do for one another because of Christ. It is love. That is the core of everything. So when we get that right, or when we try to get that right, that's always going to have a positive impact on everything else that we're trying to do as Christians. So, excellent point. Did you have something?
I was thinking too about how important the loving your enemies were for Jesus. He threw out so many zingers to people
Yeah.
that just turned everything up on their head. And for us to have this, sometimes when I read this, I go, oh, you know, that those Sadducees and those Pharisees and people back then, they had their checklists every day, pray so many times, clean your hands, do this, and check, and I'm good, pat myself on the back, I've done my work, Lord. And oftentimes we, and especially me, I'm like, oh, I've done good, but then when you get to this, you're like, ooh, I'm not sure that I'm loving my enemies. And Jesus keeps on reminding us of that, because it's not a checklist for us to check all the good things we've done today. It's, are we changing our hearts and others and how we react, as she said, you know, it's not how you just react, but it's a tough challenge that does take the prayer and the actions of stepping out and feeling uncomfortable sometimes, because it isn't an easy thing to to check off your list. Well, I love my enemies today. Bless your heart, you know, so, because that's what you want to say, but Jesus is like, no, really, you gotta be different when you do this. It's not something just to pat yourself on the back and go on. I didn't kill anybody today.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's the thing, yeah, and it's different in the, what the Pharisees and the Sadducees had, it was like, oh, this is the same for everyone, and everyone is doing the same process, and we're all on the same page, and good. And Jesus is, following Jesus is different. Everyone has a different relationship with Jesus. Everyone has different things that they find difficult about what he teaches, and they have different things that they find difficult at different times in their life. It's very much, a process that is unique to the individual. But even while it's unique, another thing that I thought of while you were talking is, I feel like when we try to love our enemies or when we try to pray for people that we don't, like sometimes we'll sort of start seeing ourselves in them, and they're like, oh, they did that. I could see myself doing that if I was, thinking that way. Or, oh, from their perspective, yes, I can kind of get, that isn't something totally out of character of what I might do too. So, and that can also help deepen that sort of realizing that they're human and that, we're all different but similar, and we all need Jesus, and we all are not there yet, we're all not perfect. So, yes, if there is nothing else, I will close this in prayer. But if there's something else, we can. Okay, very good. Let us pray. O God, the Father of all, whose Son commanded us to love our enemies, lead them and us from prejudice to truth, deliver them and us from hatred, cruelty, and revenge, and in your good time enable us all to stand reconciled before you. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. I love your red letter Bibles. I